Senator Menéndez, for what purpose?
Question to the author, Mr. President.
Senator Middleton, do you yield?
I do yield.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Middleton. So, Senator Middleton, as I read the bill, I find it interesting. The bill aims to create a different definition of equality when it comes to gender. It says, in the context of biological sex, equal does not mean the same, and separate not inherently mean unequal. And so, as you know, I'm not a lawyer, but I thought the definition of equality was pretty well established through the 14th Amendment, and I know you are an attorney. Can you remind me what the 14th Amendment to the Constitution says?
Right, so you're just referring to the findings here, right?
Correct.
And that's page 2, I believe, line 6. And what that's referring to is, for example, Title IX, right?
Right.
Title IX was created to ensure opportunity for women, right? And we had that bill on the floor last session, the Save Women's Sports Act, which was ensuring the integrity of Title IX, because women were being denied fairness, they're being denied opportunity, they're being denied hard-earned spots on teams, they're being denied scholarships. All of these things were happening because men were unfairly competing against them in college sports, and that's exactly what that refers to.
So the 14th Amendment says the government can't treat similarly situated individuals or groups differently without a valid reason. So it feels like we're laying the groundwork to justify treating women differently. And so I'm just curious, why do you feel we should treat women not unequal, but not the same?
All this bill does is it defines sex and male and female. That's all it does. You're talking about legislative findings right here. And one of the purposes of that, let's talk about the HUB program, right, run by the comptroller.
Yeah.
Historically underutilized businesses, right? And one of those categories is woman-owned.
Yep.
So would it be okay for a man pretending to be a woman claiming that woman-owned business category, right?
Right.
I don't think anyone thinks that's okay, Senator.
So earlier in your layout, I think I heard you say you wanted to make sure we could protect women. You talked about women-only spaces, correct?
That was an example.
And so I believe while this is a noble cause, sometimes this could be a double-edged sword where the government might think it appropriate to segregate women from society in certain ways, education, athletics, otherwise, because of the claim of making them more safe. We've also seen governments in other parts of the world use this as a means for control, preventing women from accessing education, from accessing financial independence, being considered property ownership under the guise of their protection. So my concern sometimes is that we need to prevent Texas from falling on the wrong side of the sword. And I understand that that's not what your bill deals with, but it potentially could lead us in that direction. Are you concerned about that?
No, not at all. By better defining biological sex, we're protecting that example that you just gave.
Okay. So whether this legislation deals with preventing a woman from accessing education, financial independence, property ownership, or any other aspect of society that you and I freely enjoy as men, history has not been on our side. So if this were just about government records, couldn't we have just started the bill at the section with the two definitions similar to most of our legislation? Because I wonder, in this bill, you specifically chose to start by laying out a series of arguments which I fear could provide a legal basis to treat women as a different class of people, which is not a protective way in attempting to protect women in ways we may actually contribute to the erosion of their rights. And so, Senator, I have seen a growing concern of legislation like this that could be used to erase the existence of non-binary and transgender Texans. So why is your bill necessary when agencies already have procedures for collecting sex and gender data?
Well, because there's not always an accurate way to do that. And I'll point out, this is already being done. Executive Order, January 30th, 2025. All Texas agencies must ensure that agency rules, internal policies, employment practices, and other actions comply with the law and biological reality that there are only two sexes, male and female. And so one of the best examples earlier is, what if there is a woman-owned business grant program, right? Is that fair if a man is going to claim that grant and say that he's a woman, and then it's not defined in the law? So what are we to say about that? That's why this is so important. And I'll also point out that we've never had to define this before until what's happening recently. 20 years ago, no one ever thought that a man would compete in women's sports or that a boy would compete in girls' high school sports, which was the Protect Girls Act that we passed in 2021. But it happened, and we had to pass those laws to protect fairness and to protect opportunity and what is fundamentally right.
I can respect the viewpoint, but I do also believe, Senator, that codifying binary-only sex definitions and explicitly excluding non-binary, transgendered, and intersex Texans, in a sense, could be felt by people as a form of state-sponsored discrimination. And so I'm concerned about that. I think if a law forces a non-binary Texans who are real people into categories that don't reflect their lived experiences or identities, then those who uses those categories to decide rights, services, and protections, that would actually become discrimination in practice. And I'm not sure if you're concerned about that outcome. That's a concern that I have. You have any concerns about that?
Well, I'll give you a couple examples of concerns I've got. Family violence shelters. They're dedicated to women sometimes. Would we want a man to be in that, right? Yeah. That's not a good situation. Is that keeping anyone safe? What if someone has just left a terrible, abusive situation, a woman has, and then a man is allowed to enter that family violence shelter? Or a correctional facility. There's tons of sections of our code that say that female inmates, if they're being inspected, they have to be so by a female jailer, right? So there's a lot of situations. Also, foster children, same thing. It has to be, if it's a young girl, it's got to be a female that is in charge of them in a lot of situations.
I think you bring a good example.
We have these correctional facilities are as well. I mean, you certainly wouldn't want a man in a woman's prison unit, right? I mean,
no, not necessarily.
I don't think so.
So one of the concerns that I have, though, is if you had, by definition of what you have here, let's say someone who was born, their birth certificate said they were male, but they've transitioned and they're in every regard, they're a female, they're maybe slight of build, they have, long hair, traditional female qualities, but the birth certificate says they're a male. So by the definition of what you've told us, you think they should go into then a male prison? Would they be safe?
It's their biological sex, and I'll point this out with Department of State Health Services right here. To correct a child's sex due to proven incompletion or inaccuracy, the only two ways that you can. This is in Texas, right here, Department of State Health Services. And it says that a letter from the hospital or a medical facility at birth identifying the error and explaining the correction. Your birth sex is your birth sex, period.
At the end of the day, I believe that our job here is to represent all 31 million Texans. And I mean, obviously, we all know that not all Texans fit neatly into our versions of male and female categories. They could be intersex, they could be non-binary, they could be transgender. And my fear and my concern is the message that we're sending to these young people. I feel that on page 3 of your bill, a female and a woman has the definition of individual whose biological reproductive system is developed to produce ova. Do you recall that in your bill?
Yes, on page 3, it said.
So I'm sure you've heard of the Swire syndrome, which is a medical condition that does not allow a woman to produce ova. I'm sure you've heard of that in the research that you've done. So then if that happens, are we saying that that woman who has the Swire syndrome is not a female?
No, because it doesn't say functioning, and also then you go further down, it says sex means an individual's biological sex, either male or female.
Okay, I understand that. So unfortunately, that part where you have the reproductive system developed to produce ova is a very narrow, and many individuals won't fit into that mold. So, Senator, is your intention in this bill to make individuals fit into a mold in which some individuals may be left out, maybe because they're just a little different than others?
The intent is to reflect biological reality.
So I hope you understand that this bill will force individuals to try to accommodate into these boxes that most of us, it's not a problem. For most of us, it's not a problem. But the problem for me is that the million or so people that live in my district don't all fit into neat little boxes. And I don't want them to feel that we're trying to erase who they are. And that's my issue with the bill, but I appreciate you answering my questions.
Thank you.